Yo, what's going on, E7 fam? It's Friday, which means you may or may not have a job and you may or may not have stuff to do today. That said, I want to thank you for joining me for another balance adjustment preview, this one for the April 13th patch, which we'll be getting in just a few weeks' time. As with all of the balance adjustment previews that I do here on this channel, I'll be giving you my 2 cents on the characters and artifacts, their changes, do I think they're good, things like that. If you are unfamiliar with the characters, I will also put them and the artifacts up on the screen with a couple of notes I've written down before I've actually kind of sat down to make this video. So that way you can kind of see where my mind is at on things that I'd like to see changed in the character in order for them to kind of be more up to speed. And that way we have a frame of reference, can kind of compare and contrast, see what actually worked, what actually did not work. If you do like this video, as always, please consider leaving a like on it. And if you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to my channel. It does, again, help me out here a ton. Intro out of the way, as always, let's move on to it. In this video, we're going to be talking about last Rider Krau, Closer Charles, Ken, Lilius, Illnav, who's been super requested in these balance patches, Tywin, Christy, and the artifacts are going to be Crown of Glory and Ancient Dragon's Legacy. That would be Tywin's artifact as well as Mort's artifact. So, let's kick it off with the boy himself, the man himself, Last Rider Krau. For Last Rider Krau, one of the big things that I would have liked to have seen is the ramp up time being a little bit faster on his mobile weapon Siegfried. It feels a little long, especially if you're not going to be soul burning it a lot. And his passive Code 00 just doesn't feel super impactful because the shield size isn't the greatest and it doesn't come up a whole hell of a lot. So the big things I'm looking for are basically a slightly better shield and slightly better ramp up time on mobile weapon Siegfried, and I feel like they've accomplished that with these changes. So the first change is going to be on code number 00, which is his passive. After being attacked, decreases skill cooldowns of the caster by 1 turn. After suffering an attack that targets all allies, decreases skill cooldowns by an additional 1 turn. And grants a barrier to all allies for 1 turn. Barrier strength increases proportional to the caster's max health. Barrier effect can only be activated once per turn, and they increase the barrier strength. So boom, right off the bat, stronger barrier, faster ramp up time. Exactly what Last Rider Krau needed. Now, I've seen some people say that they think he should have also gotten like a 1 debuff cleanse when you hit him with an AoE attack, but you can't have everything on the character, right? Like, the character got exactly what he needed with code number 00 here. Let's not push the envelope and put the character too far over the top. Let's see how the character is with these changes before we give him even further changes. Like, if this is still not enough to make Krau good, then I'd be on board with giving him another small tweak, like a small cleanse. But if you give him the small cleanse up front, then you are, again, giving him everything in the kitchen sink. And that's how we get to characters like Mediator Quirk. Not saying that 1 small cleanse would do that with Last Rider Krau, but yeah, he doesn't need all of that. Like, this is definitely a step in the right direction, and I think it's super, super good. Just this change alone basically makes Last Rider Krau, if you think about it, into a Dark Corvus. You really don't want to hit the Last Rider Krau with anything now because it's going to give him mobile weapon Siegfried a bit faster. So that's going to be a really, really good change for him. Mobile weapon Siegfried also was changed. The cooldown was increased by 1 turn from 6 to 7. That's to be expected because now, even with this the changes here, it's still going to ramp up faster. If it was at 6 turns, in addition to his soul burn, it would have been pretty ludicrous. You would have been spamming this move nonstop. So I can understand basically taking it back a half turn by increasing the cooldown here. So that's fine. We also got more damage on mobile weapon Siegfried because it now has a speed multiplier component on top of its existing health multiplier component, which really, really happy to see that, because the Siegfried, while good, it sometimes doesn't feel amazing until you get to like the 3rd one and it's fully ramped up. So I'm definitely glad to see that like the initial starting damage is going to be a bit more. I do actually like that. Overall, I don't know if this is enough to make Last Rider Krau like a meta pick where he was like a first pick all the time in Golden Boys meta, or at least very close to it, but he should see a lot more regular usage, in my opinion, with the changes that he actually received here. So overall, good set of changes for the character. Next up is Closer Charles, and what I wrote down here is actually a conversation I had with a guildmate of mine, Welchie, literally like 2 days ago. I think we were playing Marvel Snap or talking about Marvel Snap, and he asked me about my thoughts on certain characters in Epic 7, and somehow we got on to the topic of Closer Charles, because I think we were talking about the Asthmatic 13 one-shot, and he was like, man, I really wish I could use Closer Charles in PvP again, because he's like super fun. The problem is when you press the S3, you just get countered to high hell and back by all of the anti-cleave things that are in the game right now. If his S3 just didn't trigger a counterattack, that would be like the best thing ever. And I was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. If S3 didn't trigger a counterattack, then Closer Charles would be an excellent aggressive pick when you're trying to pivot into aggro against slower turn 2 players. Like, that's what he's designed to do. Like, when you're playing against slower people or people that are just kind of like in that turn 2 bruiser mentality, Closer Charles is the perfect pick because he gives you the CR push. He's a good attacker. Gives the attack buff. Excellent. He just triggers all the counters. That's the problem. And lo and behold, here we are, like 48 hours later. Descent. Attacks all enemies after descending, increasing attack of all allies for 2 turns before increasing combat readiness by 20%. This skill cannot trigger a counterattack. He got exactly what he needed. It's not enough to make him like super broken or anything, but the matches where he's supposed to be played in, he's going to have an easier time doing it. Again, Closer Charles is not meant to be your Ran or your Zio, your I have first turn guaranteed no matter what. He is meant entirely to be that kind of that bridge if you've already got turn 1 with another character, or he's meant to just be your opener against people that don't have generally fast teams. Again, it's pretty simple. Clear cut and dry. Moving on, let's talk about Ken now. For Ken, we really need to see something for this character that is going to open up his usage outside of Ancient Inheritance. Right now, he's probably like the best character in the entire game in Ancient Inheritance, or at least very close to it. But the problem is he's not really good anywhere else. Like, he's just good in Ancient Inheritance. We would like to see him have some other PvE usage, or even like some kind of PvP applications. Like, he's just really not usable anywhere outside of Ancient Inheritance. So my other suggestion would basically be a rework for this character. I guess being the best at Ancient Inheritance is fine, but if you were going to buff the character, then either we got to change him so that he has broad appeal, or again, we open up his usage outside of Ancient Inheritance. So here's what he got. Celestial Kick. Instead of granting 40 Fighting Spirit when this move defeats an enemy, you now just get the 40 Fighting Spirit up front when you actually use the move. Alright, cool. That's a decent change. Not anything else really to say about that. You just get everything up front. The other change is on Phoenix Flurry, which is his S3. Before, it used to make it so that he would start the first battle with 50 Fighting Spirit and gain 5 Fighting Spirit whenever he was attacked. Now, at the start of the first fight, he starts with 40 Fighting Spirit. So they're kind of trying to get you to go into the Phoenix Flurry move faster with these changes, but the 5 Fighting Spirit when attacked, I feel like that actually hurts his Ancient Inheritance usage just a little tiny bit, because, at least for me, I put Ken in the front line. Like, I'm okay with letting him tank all the attacks, and he just gets a bunch of Fighting Spirit for that. That's great. Now that kind of component is just gone. That's the only changes that Ken got here. It's pretty puzzling because I think it just makes his short-term value fine, but makes his long-term value worse. And considering he's great in long fights in Ancient Inheritance, that's like the only place people play him, and these are really puzzling changes. So if you're somebody who actually uses Ken outside of Ancient Inheritance, then like let me know what you think about these buffs. I'm not a super big fan of these. Like, they're, again, kind of puzzling. I think it might end up backfiring, like how some of you said in the last one, that Melissa's changes kind of make her worse. I feel like these actually kind of can potentially make Ken worse, which Ken's not a character I want to see be worse in this game. He's already pretty low on the totem pole compared to many other characters in this game. Next up is Lilius. For Lilius, I have stats written down here. And let me explain why that is the case. Lilius is one of those rare characters in Epic 7 that makes use of every single stat in the entire game. She's a knight that can hold Arius, meaning that if you want to, you can put a bunch of health and defense on her. She is a knight. She can function as an actual tank. She is also very fast for a knight, and also her S1 has a random dual attack with someone on her team, which means that if you are a very fast Lilius, you will be getting a lot of value out of that skill, so she really also wants speed. She has a provoke, which is for 2 turns, which is really, really strong. That's going to require some high effectiveness if you are trying to use it into specific characters. Now, we also move on to other things, namely the S3. The S3 has a damage component on it, and the damage is quite good, but to take advantage of that, you need a bunch of critical hit chance and critical hit damage. It is also a full cleanse for your team, but in order to ensure that Lilius isn't silenced, slept, or stunned to actually make use of this cleanse, you would need to have a bunch of effect resistance. So as you can see, character can take advantage of every stat. She's just not going to have enough, especially because she's an Ares Knight, and Ares Knights don't exactly have the best stats. It's my favorite stat line for a Knight to have, but it feels a bit worse in some categories compared to traditional Knights. My theory is that they actually have the 4-star and 5-star Ares Knight stats wrong, because the 4-star Knight Ares has better stats than the 5-star Knight Ares in almost every category. Why that is, I couldn't tell you. But the 5-star Ares Knight, again, is a little bit lacking, so we need to make up those stats somewhere on this character. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, since Conqueror Lilius has come out, this Lilius feels really, really niche, because if you wanted a character to up the defensive capability of your team and just spam the S1 or just provoke a specific thing, Conqueror Lilius does all of that better. So this character just doesn't really have a niche outside of the S3, which is different, which means you're either building her for damage with something like Senya on your team, or you're building her for effect resistance for the cleanse. But as we've talked about in a lot of the videos here on this channel, characters like Mediator Koeric really invalidate traditional cleansers. So again, she really needs to find a foothold, some kind of a niche, and make it easier for her to actually gear the character. With that out of the way, let's talk about what she actually got. So, the first ability here, the S1, Follow Me Charge, it still has the random dual attack chance from an ally, but it now increases critical hit chance by 50% when attacking, and damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's max health. So this is the language that is similar to a character like Zahak, for example. This is super helpful because, again, we need stats. So if you wanted to go for damage Lilius, you get the extra 50% critical hit chance on this character, and that's going to make things a lot easier. So now you only really need like 35% crit chance on this character in order to actually have a damage Lilius. That's not too much of an investment. You can play her on like critical hit chance offset to make it even easier. You don't really need a lot of critical hit chance at all to actually take advantage of some of the damage properties that Lilius actually has. So that is pretty good. Even better than that is the change to the soul burn. It's those 4 words that I hate talking about all the time when we talk about soul burns. She now has soul burn for the cost of 20 souls, take an extra turn. It's getting ridiculous. I understand why they're doing it, though, because it just makes her into kind of a damage machine. If you have a surplus of souls and 1 surviving DPS on your team, you can just spam this for just huge value. Get a lot of dual attacks out of your Spectres, your Remnant Violets, things like that. So, again, really good change to the S1, really good change to the S2, or I'm sorry, the Soul Burn as far as the actual playability goes. Got ahead of myself here. The S2 was also changed, and it's fantastic. It no longer is an activated provoke with a barrier. Instead, it is a passive skill here that says, after an enemy uses a non-attack skill, dispels 1 debuff from the caster and activates suppression against the enemy caster. Suppression can only be activated once every 2 turns. Suppression provokes the target for 1 turn and grants a barrier to the caster for 2 turns. Barrier strength increases proportional to the caster's max health. Barrier strength on this is decreased, so the barrier is not as big as it used to be, and the provoke is only 1 turn instead of 2 turns. But now the barrier functions akin to a character like Politis or a character like Selene. And one of the things that is of note here on this is that it says it dispels 1 debuff from the caster, which means that unlike Politis, who can just be slept and then Lua presses S3, you can't do that with Lilius. So you essentially get to actually punish the Lua for going for S2 into S3. And we'll talk more about why that is a full punish later on when we talk about the artifact section. But this is a good change. This is another floodgate to stop specific strategies in Epic 7, like Politis, like Selene, kind of like Teu. He's kind of like the failed experiment, I feel like, out of this. But yeah, this is a very, very good change. This gives Lilius that niche that we're looking for. She's another character that punishes non-attack skills, and she's also a potential tank at that. So it's like you can kind of safe commit to Lilius early and feel pretty good about that. The last change is on Ready, Load, Fire. It also has a 50% critical hit chance increase, just like with the S1. So again, does help us with that actual damage build if that's what we're going for. And the base damage on this move was also increased, which is super good because this thing in some builds can actually just cleave a whole enemy team. So if you are somebody who likes that Lilius cleave MLM, then this is obviously going to be super good. Overall, I think Lilius is probably the winner of this patch because the character, when she used to be played, was pretty good until she was completely eclipsed by her ML counterpart. And a lot of the things that she was looking for, the niche, the easier to gear character because you're getting a bunch of free stats, that's there, that's all present. And when we talk again about the artifact at the end of the video, it should become even more apparent. Like, Lilius just feels like a very safe bet in this patch. She just seems very, very strong. Next up is Illnav, a character I've wanted buffed pretty much forever, and I'm sure many of you watching this video feel exactly the same. So for Illnav, I have a couple of things written down here. Number one, the S1's value when it doesn't proc punish just isn't good enough. It doesn't feel that good. It just hits like a wet noodle. It doesn't have any extra, properties on it. It doesn't have any debuffs, nothing. We get nothing out of it if we do not actually proc punish. The other thing that I would like to have seen for Illnav is free stats akin to what we saw with Lilius. Illnav has Charles' stat line, which, don't get me wrong, it hits like a truck, but Illnav is just not going to be super tanky. For all of the knight stat lines that you could have, that stat line in particular, just, you can definitely make it really tanky, but most of the time, it just doesn't feel like you can get that HP value too high or that defense value too high without sacrificing way too much in the damage department. So I would have liked to have seen maybe something to help out, especially in the HP department because she is a health scaler. That would have been super, super nice to see. And most importantly, the character really needs a niche. S1 is most of the time a do-nothing skill. S2 is a fine ability that has injury baked in. And S3 is a very whatever AoE damage attack that has some support capabilities. So when you look at the kit on the whole, it doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot. It's a support move, a pretty good damage move, and a does nothing move. So what role is that character supposed to fill? Especially because she's a knight. So it's like, it's not a tank, that's for sure. But for somebody who wants to be a damage dealer, we kind of have two dud moves in the actual kit. So let's see what we actually got on Illnav. So first thing is, on Rush, the S1, the damage dealt was increased. And that's it. And that's a little bit disappointing. I would have liked to have seen something a little bit more than this. But if the damage increase is pretty substantial, so that way when we do not actually proc punish, then I'll take it, right? It's better than nothing, but it's not exactly the best thing that we could have gotten. The next change is going to be on the S2 punish. So before, it had an increased defense of the caster for 2 turns, which we're going to lose that, and that does hurt because, again, remember, this character is not exactly the tankiest. Instead, it's going to get a successful attack deals additional damage equivalent to 50% of injuries inflicted on the target. All right, now we're actually talking. Now we're actually cooking with this character. So this statement right here says that if you are going to play an injury-based team with like Death Dealer Ray or like a Bellion or maybe an Injury Solitary or an Edward, Illnav is an excellent character to pair up with. This means that this character is basically just going to annihilate people that are actually injured. So she actually has a clearly defined role. She is basically the bane of health scaling characters' existence with this actual change. Because now you have an injury move that is going to hit like an absolute truck. It's going to just destroy characters like Apocalypse Robbie or Alencia or Edward Elric. So this change is really, really good. Punish was already the best move on the kit. Making it the focal point of the kit and giving the character an identity with that move is, I think, super, super good. Unfortunately, the soul burn was changed so it's no longer spammable for 10 souls. Instead, it's just soul burn to increase the damage dealt, which traditionally is like the weakest soul burn or one of the weakest soul burns that you can actually have in the game. But we actually have to see how much that additional damage is. I want to see the values on it because potentially if you just soul burn this, you might be able to just like blow up an Apocalypse Robbie at like 60% health with this thing. So we'll end up seeing where this goes. But again, this seems like a step in the right direction. Does give Illnav a pretty good niche. And it's further reinforced with the changes to the S3 on Repel. Repel now is a move that has AoE injury built in, which synergizes very well with Punish. And again, gives her that clearly defined role. It's funny, most of the dragons in the game are health scaling characters. Illnav in lore is a dragon slayer, making this character essentially the bane of dragon characters' existences is, I think, very fitting. So again, I really like that change to Repel. It's really, really good. Also, base damage of Repel is going up because it honestly felt like it hit like a wet noodle, at least from the times that I actually ended up using it. So overall, I'm very excited about these changes for Illnav. If she ends up being pretty good, I know my how to play video is pretty outdated on it. I will pin some changes to that video. At this point, I am thinking that I might have to start doing a bunch of 5 to 7 minute update videos on a lot of my old how to play videos because with balance changes like this, certain things are not going to be as they were in the past. For example, Rimuru Tempest and Milam are going to most likely get a rerun if the leaks are actually true. And if that's true, a lot of their gameplay patterns and builds have changed since then. And obviously people will be looking for my old videos, so I will probably have to do an update. So if you're keen on that, make sure you are tuned to the channel. I will get those out in due time if possible. Let's move on now to Tywin. So Tywin was never exactly like a great knight. He was kind of like a cleave character until Flan came out where she was a side grade to Tywin and there was kind of a difference between them. Tywin was for one type of playstyle, Flan was for like another, but neither of them were super great. Then they buffed Flan because people really wanted Flan to be good, and then Tywin really wasn't anything. He was just not a character. So if we want Tywin to actually do something, he needs to step out from underneath Flan's shadow. So he either needs to have something that differentiates him from Flan, or we need to rework the character entirely so that he has a completely different identity. And I'm pretty happy to say I think they've accomplished that. Let's take a look at what he got. So the soul burn that he used to have, which was take an extra turn on his S3, is gone now. It now has soul burn, increases the effect chance of his dispel for 1 buff by 100% for the cost of 10 souls. I think it was Elvmage pointed out that this soul burn here is just worse than Unbound Knight ROL's soul burn because that's 2 for the cost of 10 souls. So this move's still kind of underpowered. The soul burn here is, I guess, nice, but it's not exactly anything great. What is great, though, is the change to the S2. It is no longer an activated ability that grants an attack and critical hit chance buff to the caster and target ally for 2 turns. Now, it makes it so that Blue Tywin is immune to debuffs which prevent movement, which it clarifies here. Debuffs which prevent movement are stun and sleep. So he cannot be stunned, he cannot be slept, which is super, super good for your knight, especially if they have some utility on them because you're not going to really need to build effect resistance on it. If Dark Corvus has taught us anything, being immune to stun is pretty good, and you don't have to necessarily go effect resistance to be good. You probably still should, but it's not a mandatory thing when you have such a powerful component to the passive. It also has, when the ally in the back row has a debuff which prevents movement after being attacked, activates Commanding Shout on the target, can be activated once every 2 turns. Commanding Shout is a non-attack skill that dispels all debuffs from the ally and grants immunity and a barrier for 2 turns. Barrier strength increases proportional to caster's max health. Wow, okay, so we definitely just gave this character a massive buff to his usability. We definitely just gave this character a role and a defined niche. So Tywin is the tank now that you want to play if you want to make sure that a specific carry of yours is not going to be stunned or slapped. So if you're playing against characters like Sage Ballin Saison or Solitaria of the Snow, or you're afraid of that S3 on Spectre Tenebria, essentially stunning or locking out a specific character that you have on your team. Imagine playing Sylvan Sage Vivian into a Spectre team when they have Spectre Arowell. If you pick Blue Tywin and slot her in the back, you don't have to worry about potentially things like Endless Nightmare stun and also even the S3 from Unbound Knight Arowell. So character definitely has defined uses in the current metagame. And I expect that he will see some play, or at least early on, to experiment with these changes, because having the ability to protect a backline character with a shield has always been traditionally strong. Look at Adventure Roz. Having the ability to protect a backline character from debuffs, also traditionally strong. Troublemaker Crozet. Christy, for example. Players like KHHM have used Christy to fairly good success. So traditionally, that's a pretty strong niche, a pretty awesome one to actually have on the character. So I'm curious to see how Tywin plays out. It is important to note that it says when the ally in the back row has a debuff which prevents movement after being attacked. So obviously that will work with attacks that stun or sleep. However, in the case of a character like Pirate Captain Flan places a bomb as her attack, and then at the end of the turn, it detonates and stuns. That would mean that the stun was not triggered after being attacked. It is an end of turn procedure before we go to the next character's turn. So that's important to keep in mind. Pirate Captain Flan, still good against Tywin. This is not an answer to that character. But for most other things, like I said, your Arwells, your Spectres, your Sage Balls, your Solitarius, Tywin is a great pickup. The last thing in his kit here is on all-out attack. It increases the defense of all allies for 2 turns now when you use it, and you also get 1 extra soul. It is now a 3-soul move. That is also a very good change. Tywin is traditionally, again, more of a cleave character. He wasn't really a knight, and part of that is because his skill set really doesn't favor being a tank. It's an AoE defense break, which is really strong, by the way. If you just look at Ambitious Tywin, that's why he's so heavily played right now in the meta. So having a character with an AoE defense break, that's more of a cleave thing. And then the Dispel here is more of a support thing, not really a tank thing. There's no provoke, no damage mitigation. So giving him a 2-turn defense buff in addition to protecting the specific back character means that the character starts to actually feel like a character you'd want to play on Arius, but you still could use on Elbrus Ritual Sword if you so chose. So yeah, Tywin meta is looking very real. I don't expect this Tywin, blue here, to be the go-to every single game. But it's definitely strong. Like Tywin Destina drafts, like blue Tywin plus Destina, is feeling pretty good, especially if you're trying to wait and see what your opponent has. Pick that specific key damage dealer that hard counters the enemy team, and then just kind of lock it up and protect it so that way no debuffs and no like focusing can really get to it. I really like where Tywin's at. I really like his defined role that they gave him. Looking at the exclusive equipments here that were changed, the first one here is the second EE. Decreases cooldown of all attack by 1 turn when a buff is dispelled with Swordstorm. I really liked this one in the past. I was sad to see it go, but the one that we got here instead is actually quite a bit better. Increases combat radius of the ally in the back row by 10% when using the S1. Excellent value if you're going to be playing blue Tywin on counter set, or if you're going to be playing him on Elbrus Ritual Sword, or both. You're going to get a lot of value. Again, gives him that clearly defined role that he was looking for. The exclusive equipment that increases combat radius of the caster by initial 20% when using the S2 is now changed to having a 20% larger barrier when you get the activated component of the passive. Again, Tywin, excellent character change. I'll definitely be 6-starring him and trying him out with the changes alongside Lilius. I really like him. I think he might be like the second best change in the entire patch. Really, really excited for him. It's funny, by the way, Tywin originally, before the game released, was supposed to be Raz's older brother. It's pretty fitting that they changed Tywin to be like a different version, like a blue Raz with a couple of flavor changes. I really do like that. Next up, we have Christy, and you already know the drill if you've watched any of my balance adjustment preview review videos in the past. It's a 3-star. Needs a specialty change. The character's kit could be absolutely busted, but the stats will never let it be truly competitive unless it has a speed imprint like a character like Mirsa. So, here's what we got. Oath Shield lost its 15% innate counter attack chance on it, and instead gained an incredible passive in after being attacked when the caster does not have a debuff, increases combat radius of the caster and the ally in the back row by 20%, can only be activated once per turn. Really reinforces that extra ER for the character that is actually in the back. Really, really good. Makes it very difficult, again, to get to a specific character. Very akin to all of these Tywin changes that we just talked about. I think it will make Christy quite a bit better. The only like edge case that feels like it might not be as good is actually with Arya, which many of you suggested in the comments. Christy and Arya is an incredible wombo combo that I did not include in how to play Arya. That will definitely work, but with these changes, you're kind of accelerating the Arya a little bit, so she won't have the Umbral Hour up as much. That could potentially be kind of bad. I've never actually played those two characters in tandem, so I wouldn't know or wouldn't be able to speak super well on how good or bad this change actually is. But in most scenarios, I feel like this change, I would rather have the 20% CR than the 50% counter attack chance. So overall, good set of changes. If Christy ever gets a specialty change, this character is going to be monstrously good. Just like I said, when ROL got all of her changes before a specialty change, if the character ever got a specialty change, she would be monstrously good in meta. That turned out to be true. I feel very much the same way with Christy. This character is a specialty change away from being a supremely meta pick character. Now let's move on to the actual artifacts here. The first of which is Crown of Glory. Part of my problem with Crown of Glory is that it doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot. It does have the soul removal component, but it doesn't really stop a lot of the soul combos up front that I'm looking to actually stop. It's only like, hey, if I survive the AoE onslaught, then I kind of ding their souls a little bit. It doesn't really take away a whole heck of a lot of steam. So I'm not super in love with this one. The best case scenario for it in the past is probably still the new best case scenario before, where your opponent has 40 souls and they soul burn something like a Ran, for example. And then they got themselves 20 souls and you cut them down another 5 so they can't get another 20 soul burn. Yeah, sure. That, to me, that's not super great. I want my soul removal to be a bit more proactive, because the thing is, when they spend the souls, the game is probably already over. So the fact that you have to survive and somehow be in this niche scenario where the 5 souls actually matters is kind of a bummer most of the time. So I would have liked to have seen some kind of rework or anything, but what we got is not exactly that. But it still is kind of good. So instead of giving the 8 to 16% defense based on artifact level, it now has, when an ally suffers an attack that targets all allies, decreases that damage suffered by 10 to 20%, doesn't stack with other damage reduction effects. That's significantly better. Getting 16% defense, whatever. Damage reduction is incredible. It's the reason why a paper-thin Zeo can still survive while he has the DFI buff up. Damage reduction in video games traditionally is the best form of weight mitigation. Like, it's just very, very strong. It applies to the total damage formula. So that is a huge change and potentially does allow you to actually survive. Like I said, you need to actually survive, it feels like, to get value out of Crown of Glory, and it seems like they recognize that. They didn't change it in a way that, would be, I think, really good, because we definitely need more proactive answers to Ancient Book if they refuse to actually nerf the thing. But this is a step in the right direction. I think that Crown of Glory is a playable artifact. I think you can play it on specific characters, especially the last Rider Krau that just got buffed. He obviously wants to be played into heavy AoE compositions with like Lone Crescent, Bologna, and stuff. This is a slam dunk artifact on that character. You're going to get that bigger barrier. You're going to get that damage reduction. It does everything. It synergizes super well with the actual character. I'm, again, not super in love with it. Still feels pretty niche, but on Last Rider Krau, it does feel pretty good. Overall, again, kind of mixed on it. I probably would have liked to see something more proactive against Book, but this is fine. The last one in the video is Ancient Dragon's Legacy. This is Mort's artifact. It just doesn't have enough users, and it's really hard to recommend it over an artifact like Elber's Ritual Sword, so you pretty much have to rework it. And pseudo rework it they did. Instead of giving a flat 15% critical hit chance, it now has, when you use a non-attack skill, decreases skill cooldowns of all allies by 1 turn, and still has that 50 to 100% chance based on artifact level to grant critical hit damage buff to the caster for 2 turns. Notably, the skill cooldown reduction effect can only be activated once per game. So, you're just going to play it on Red Lilius. Red Lilius with the changes, with this artifact, is pretty much the counter that we've been looking for to Lua. She will cleanse out of stealth. She will put the cooldowns right back where they were after Lua presses the S3. That said, you're still not going to get me to stop banning Lua because they only need to post-ban Red Lilius, and I'm in serious trouble still because it's Lua, and she's kind of insane. Yeah, obviously, you're going to play it on your Red Lilius. That's pretty much where it goes. The skill cooldown thing here can be gamed a little bit. Say Lua doesn't actually press the S3, and then another faster character comes up and presses their non-attack skill, like say Ahmed, for example. Then you're going to end up wasting that effect, most likely. I don't know if all your cooldowns are full, if that skill cooldown reduction effect will actually trigger. But there's definitely ways you can game it, and Lua can still kind of play around it. So, again, it's not a perfect solution. Would have rather have seen Lua nerfed, rather than just kind of be like, here is the silver bullet with these changes, this character plus this artifact. Because that's all feels very magical Christmas land. Skilled opponents are just going to know, I ban the Lilius, I win the game. Just like how if the opponent, or if you have Angel of Light Angelica and you see the only cleanser on the team is Mediator Queric or Destina, you can just ban it and run away with the game. It's very much the exact same strategy in draft. So overall, good change because it does reinforce something that we need. It's just that thing is super easy to play around, or you can just outright ban it, kind of like how Bellion's the only proactive solution to Book and is constantly banned by anybody who actually wants to abuse Book. Hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. So overall, this balance patch was a home run. I think that almost everything in the entire balance patch was great. The only thing I really didn't care for is Ken, and like I said, if I missed something, you can let me know down in the comments below. Let me know what you're most excited about in this balance patch. I think for me, it's probably Tywin or Illnav. Lilius is great, don't get me wrong, but I've been wanting to play Illnav for a really, really long time, and Tywin just looks super, super interesting and super fun. So again, those are my thoughts on the balance patch. Again, hopefully you enjoyed the video. I will catch you all in the very next video, which will be tomorrow. So I do hope you enjoy it. Later now.